The scorching afternoon sun hovered over the village of San Antonio de los Andes, casting long, intense shadows across the parched fields of Hacienda Los Pinos. Among the workers, Clara Domingues, a 36-year-old woman, stood out for the silent resistance in her eyes. Her steps were careful, her body marked by years of hard work, and her calloused hands held tightly to the basket of eggs as she walked along the dusty dirt roads of the village. Clara lived in a small adobe house, with weather-stained walls and a roof that slowly crumbled with each season. The house, like her, resisted, although every day it seemed a little more fragile. The Hacienda Los Pinos, where he had worked for as long as he could remember, had once been the beating heart of the region, but, under the administration of Miguel Arce, the farm had become a shadow of its former self. The workers' meager wages barely covered their expenses, and Clara, like many others, was forced to look for alternatives to survive. Every day at dawn, she carefully arranged the eggs that her chickens produced, packing them into small wooden boxes that she had built herself. Clara set up her small tent on the side of the road that led to the city, hoping that any driver who crossed her path would buy at least a little of what she had to offer. That day, like so many others, sales were scarce. Only a few people stopped, and the little money raised would barely cover the basics, a bag of flour and some candles to light the house on dark nights. While organizing her eggs, Clara reflected on the days that were always the same, with the feeling that life, like time, was flowing through her hands without control. Every crack in her home felt like a reminder that things needed to change, but change never seemed within reach. She knew she couldn't put off much longer the repairs that the house sorely needed. Joaquin Morales, her longtime neighbor and friend, had promised to help her with the renovation of the roof, but their financial difficulties made the plans just distant dreams. Suddenly, in the distance, Clara saw something she didn't expect, a boy, standing near the bus stop, apparently lost. He looked no older than 12 and his gaze was fixed on the floor, as if the weight of his own thoughts were weighing him down. Clara's first reaction was to ignore it. After all, life was already demanding too much. But as his eyes fixed on the small, hesitant figure, something in his chest tightened. A distant memory, perhaps of her own son, who was no longer with her, made her steps direct towards the boy. Clara approached him slowly, trying not to scare him. The boy, noticing his presence, raised his head with an expression of uncertainty and surprise. His brown eyes were marked by something that Clara recognized immediately, fear and tiredness. He looked like he had been there for hours, his face stained with dust and his hair disheveled. As she approached, Clara tried to smile softly, although her heart was heavy with her own worries. "Hi, young man," Clara said in a gentle tone, extending her hand with a piece of bread she had brought for lunch. "Are you well? Looks like it could use something to eat." The boy hesitated for a moment before accepting the bread. His eyes shone with gratitude as he took it with shaking hands. Clara sat next to him, feeling the tension in her body relax a little. There was something about the boy that touched her deeply, perhaps the memory of her own son, Thomas, who never returned home after the accident that took him from her. "What is your name?" Clara asked calmly, trying not to pressure him, but curious about what had led him to that situation. "Matthias," he replied in a low voice, while biting the bread. "I'm trying to get to my dad's house, but," he stopped for a moment, struggling to maintain his composure. "I don't have money for the bus ticket." Clara sighed, feeling a tightness in her chest as she heard the story. Matthias had fled the home of his mother's abusive relatives, who treated him like a burden. He had no one to run to except his father, who lived in a town several hours away. "And the bus driver didn't let you board, right?" Clara asked, with a mixture of sadness and anger at the casual cruelty of the adult world. Matthias nodded, still staring at the ground. Clara looked at the empty road, knowing she didn't have much to offer, but she also couldn't ignore the desperation in the boy's eyes. Finally, she made a decision. "I don't have much," Clara said, taking the last few 150 pesos that he had in his pocket. But that should be enough to get you through. I want you to get to your father safely, understand? Matthias looked up, surprised. He looked at Clara as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. But are you sure? I can pay you back one day. Clara smiled, feeling an unexpected peace when making that decision. Don't worry. Just promise me you'll be okay and that you'll find your father. Matthias nodded vehemently, holding the money tightly, and for the first time that day, Clara saw a small spark of hope in his eyes. As the boy ran to catch the next bus, Clara watched him leave, feeling that despite her own hardships, there was something greater in that simple act of kindness. And little did she know that that small gesture of generosity was about to change her life in ways she never imagined. The relentless heat of the Argentine summer still hung over San Antonio de los Andes, and, for Clara Domingues, every day seemed like an endurance test. After meeting Matthias, the woman continued her routine, with a renewed sense of purpose, although the weight of her difficulties remained. The gesture of donating your last 150 pesos to help the boy find his father had left her broke, and the egg sales hadn't been enough to cover the basics that week. She came home that day with her basket almost full of unsold eggs, which meant she had to make a difficult choice: buy food or save what little she had for home repair materials. The roof, with its cracked and loose tiles, was in critical condition, but hunger and basic needs came first. Joaquin Morales, her longtime friend, had offered to help her with the renovation, but they both knew the materials cost more than they could afford. Upon entering the house, Clara felt the air stuffy and heavy. The small room, which served as a kitchen and living room, was dark, with the afternoon light only coming in through small gaps in the adobe walls. He sat down on the wooden chair, with a tired sigh, watching the ceiling that seemed to collapse at any moment. A gust of wind brought the distant sound of laughter and music from the village's central square, where residents gathered at the end of the day. But Clara did not feel part of that joy. His world was made up of worries and unfulfilled commitments. However, even with the weight of his difficulties, something had changed in his heart. The meeting with Matthias had planted a seed of hope, a reminder that simple gestures, although sacrificial, could change lives. As the days dragged on, she found herself thinking about the boy's fate. Had he found his father? Would it be safe? Clara had no way of knowing, but the fact that she acted kindly brought her a certain comfort, something she hadn't felt in a long time. His life was still as difficult as ever, but now there was a small spark of renewal in his spirit. For the first time in a long time, Clara felt that maybe, somehow, things could get better, maybe not for her, but for others around her. And, unbeknownst to her, that spark was about to grow. The following days dragged by like a slow tide, bringing the same routine as always. Clara would wake up before dawn, feed her chickens and take the basket of eggs to the road, where she would set up her small tent and wait for the rare customers who passed by. Miguel Arce, the administrator of Hacienda Los Pinos, continued to ignore workers' requests for improvements and raises. To him, they were just disposable parts of a larger machine. It was in moments like these that Clara felt the weight of her existence most deeply. However, an afternoon of gentle sunshine and unexpected breeze brought with it something different. As Clara was closing her tent, preparing to return home, a car she had never seen before slowly pulled onto the dirt road. The vehicle was black and elegant, clashing with the simple atmosphere of the village. She watched, intrigued, as the car stopped near her tent and a young, distinguished-looking man got out. He wore a perfectly tailored suit, something unusual in that region. With him was another older man, whose rugged, serious features seemed to bear years of hard work. Clara felt a strange familiarity as she watched the two approach. The young man smiled at her, and for a brief moment, Clara thought she knew him, but her mind couldn't place where. "Clara Domingues?" the young man asked, his voice carrying a tone of warm recognition. She nodded, confused, trying to understand what was happening. It was then that the older man, next to the young man, smiled and extended his hand. "Under Esteban Rivas, and this is my son, Matias." The world around Clara seemed to slow down. Matias Rivas, the lost boy she had helped years ago, was now a grown man, with a confident posture and a sparkle in his eyes that Clara hadn't seen since the last time she saw him, desperate, on the side of the road. He had changed so much, and yet, something about his deep gaze and shy posture at his father's side remained the same. You've grown so much," Clara said, unable to contain the shock and emotion in her voice. Matias smiled, his eyes revealing a gratitude that transcended words. "I never forgot what you did for me, Clara. You gave me what I needed that day, not just the money for the bus, but also hope. Thanks to you, I managed to find my father, and our life has completely changed since then." Clara was in shock. That boy she had helped now stood before her, transformed, and even more surprising was the fact that he had returned. Esteban, her father, watched her with a serious but gentle look, as if he understood the impact of that moment on their lives. "We heard about your situation here, Clara, and we're here to help," Esteban said calmly. "Matias told me about your kindness, and now that he's grown up, we're in a position to reciprocate. We want to help you repair your home and ensure you have what you need to live with dignity." Clara felt tears forming in her eyes, unable to speak. Esteban and Matias' words were like a stream of fresh air amid the stagnation of his life. The weight of the difficulties seemed, for the first time in years, to begin to lift. At that moment, the woman who had donated her last pesos without expecting anything in return realized that life, in fact, closed its cycles in unexpected ways. The first rays of the sun illuminated Clara Domingues's small house, but that morning, something was different. For the first time in many years, there was movement and hope around the property. The sound of hammers and saws cut through the silence that normally dominated the area. Esteban Rivas and his team of workers had begun repairs on Clara's house. Broken roof tiles were carefully removed, while pieces of rotted wood were replaced with new boards. Clara, who watched from her balcony, felt like a spectator of her own transformation. Time seemed to unravel before his eyes as his once dilapidated house began to take shape again. Matias Rivas, the boy she had helped years ago, was now a man, moving around the house with an attentive and determined look. He organized the team of workers, making sure every detail was handled with care. The gratitude in Matias' eyes was undeniable, and Clara felt like she was witnessing something profound, the unexpected reward of a simple act of kindness. "How are you feeling, Clara?" Esteban he asked, as he approached her, removing his hat to wipe the sweat from his forehead. Clara smiled, although she was still emotionally overwhelmed. "I am fine. In fact, I'm better than I've been in years. It's hard to believe this is happening." Esteban nodded with a warm smile. "Matias always told me about you. He couldn't forget what you did for him that day. And now we're here to make sure you have what you need." Clara looked at him, feeling the weight of the words. That man, with his solid and gentle presence, seemed like an anchor amid the storm of difficulties she had faced over the years. Beside him, Matias continued to supervise the repairs, but always cast gentle glances in Clara's direction, as if he wanted to reaffirm how important it was to him. The work progressed quickly. The team led by Joaquin Morales, who had finally obtained the necessary materials for the renovation, spared no effort to ensure that everything was perfect. Little by little, Clara's house stopped being the symbol of her difficulties and became a place of rebirth, a space of security and renewal. Each hammer blow, each beam put into place, seemed to not only rebuild the house, but also the broken pieces of Clara's life. "I never thought I would see my house like this," Clara said softly, more to herself than to Esteban, as the sounds of construction filled the air. "And all this because of a simple gesture." Esteban looked at her deeply. "Kindness has a peculiar way of coming back to us. Sometimes when we least expect it." Clara knew he was right, but she still struggled to comprehend the enormity of what was happening. His thoughts went back to the moment he had delivered the last 150 pesos for Matias, without imagining that that act would change his life so much. As the repairs to Clara's house continued, a different tension began to emerge in the Hacienda Los Pinos. Miguel Arce, the farm administrator, had noticed the unusual movement on Clara's property, and it didn't take long for him to appear, his usual expression of contempt on his face. When her luxurious car pulled into the driveway, Clara immediately felt a chill run down her spine. Miguel, with his arrogant manner, had always been an intimidating figure. He got out of his truck with an inquisitive look, examining the work in progress. "What's going on here?" he asked in a clipped tone, his voice brimming with suspicion. "How are you paying for all this work, Clara?" Clara tried to respond, but the words seemed to get stuck in her throat. Happily, Matias appeared beside her, his posture erect and calm, but with a touch of firmness that contrasted with Clara's nervousness. "I'm taking care of it," Matias said, looking directly into Miguel's eyes, without looking away. Miguel raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by Matias' presence. He knew the boy well, or rather his father, Esteban Rivas, who had become an influential businessman in the region. "You? And why are you involved?" Matias maintained his composure, although it was possible to hear the slight tremor of anger in his voice. "Clara helped me when no one else did. Now, we're here to make sure she has what she needs. And in addition, we will discuss the treatment that the farm workers have received under your management." Miguel stepped back slightly, the surprise on his face giving way to an expression of caution. "What are you talking about?" Before Matias could respond, Esteban appeared at his son's side, with an even more serious expression. "We are aware of what has been happening here, Miguel. We know that workers are being exploited, wages are being cut, and you have benefited from this. We are prepared to investigate your practices and, if necessary, take it to the authorities." Miguel turned pale. He knew the power and influence of Esteban Rivas, and an investigation could mean the end of his reign at Hacienda Los Pinos. "That's not necessary," he began, trying to sound conciliatory, but Esteban interrupted him. "We're not here to argue, Miguel. We are here to make sure things change. Clara and the other workers deserve better than what you are offering, and we will not allow this to continue." Miguel looked around, his face turning red with frustration and embarrassment. He knew he was cornered. Without a word, he turned around and got into his car, speeding towards the farm, clearly shaken. Clara, who had watched everything in silence, looked at Esteban and Matias with a mixture of gratitude and admiration. For the first time in years, he felt something was changing. It wasn't just his home that was being repaired, but also the injustices that hung over his life and the lives of his peers. As Miguel's car disappeared over the horizon, Clara knew that this wouldn't be the last time they faced him, but for the first time in a long time, she felt that she had a real chance of winning. The days after the confrontation with Miguel Arce were of change and hope for Clara Domingues and for many of the workers at Hacienda Los Pinos. The wind seemed to be blowing from a new direction, bringing a feeling that something big was about to happen. The small village of San Antonio de los Andes, it was no longer the same. Clara, previously a discreet figure, now found herself at the center of a growing movement. The workers, who had previously suffered in silence under Miguel's abusive management, began to unite around a greater cause. Esteban Rivas and your son Matias led efforts to organize meetings among workers and discuss strategies to address injustices that had persisted for too long. In the village community hall, a meeting was called, and the room was packed with men and women who, for the first time, felt part of something bigger. Esteban spoke with a calm firmness, but it was Matias who conveyed the passion necessary to motivate people. "We are here because we believe that you deserve more than you have received," Matias began, looking at the people around him. "My story is proof that compassion can change everything. Clara helped me when I was in trouble, and now it's time for us to give back. Not only to her, but to everyone who has suffered under Miguel Arce's administration. Clara was sitting next to Isabel Martinez, her friend and former co-worker, who seemed equally touched by Matias' words. Isabel, like Clara, had spent years working on the farm without seeing her efforts recognized. The two women exchanged looks of approval, feeling that something bigger was underway. "We need real change, and this change will only come if we are united," continued Matias, with contagious energy. "Let's fight together for fair wages, decent working conditions and the respect we deserve." Esteban, who until then had been listening in silence, stood up and took a step forward. "I have already taken the necessary steps to have an audit carried out on Hacienda Los Pinos accounts. Miguel Arce will not be able to continue exploiting workers with impunity. We are ready to take this to the authorities if necessary, but I also believe that the strength of our unity can make him relent without needing a more drastic confrontation." The workers murmured among themselves, and, for the first time, Clara saw the gleam of hope in the eyes of those who, until then, had only known the weight of resignation. The idea of an audit on Miguel seemed like the answer to his prayers. If it were proven that he had embezzled resources or exploited workers, it would be the end of his corrupt administration. The question is, are we willing to come together and make our voices heard? Esteban questioned. A heavy silence fell over the room, until Clara, who had listened attentively to the entire speech, slowly stood up, finding the courage to speak. "I know the pain of being ignored," Clara began, her voice calm but full of conviction. "For years, I worked on the farm hoping things would get better, but it never happened. They always told me to wait, to be patient. But patience doesn't put food on the table, and it doesn't repair the roofs of our homes." She looked directly at the people around her. "We won't wait any longer. The time has come for us to fight together." His words lit a flame in the hearts of the workers. There were murmurs of approval, and then, one by one, everyone began to agree to support Esteban and Matias' efforts. The fight for justice was just beginning, but with the unity of those who suffered most, a new hope was taking shape. As meetings continued to gain momentum and the workers' rights movement spread, Miguel Arce was far from giving up. He had heard about the organization and the talk of a possible audit, and it had put him on alert. Away in his luxurious office, Miguel plotted his next move. "I would not allow a businessman like Esteban Rivas and a group of poorly organized workers threatened his power." Miguel knew that his control over the Hacienda Los Pinos he was weakening, but he had influential contacts, people who owed him favors and who could help him circumvent an investigation. His plan was simple: destabilize the workers' union before they could become stronger. He needed to act quickly and without mercy. The day after the big workers' meeting, Clara was at her roadside egg stand, as she did every day. However, that day would be different. As she organized her products, she saw a familiar car approaching. Her heart quickened when she recognized Miguel's vehicle. The man got out of the car with a cold and calculated smile. "Clara Domingues," he began, his voice icy. "It seems that you have been getting involved in things that are none of your business." Clara stood her ground, but felt a lump form in her throat. She knew Miguel wasn't there for a friendly chat. "I know you are behind these meetings, encouraging workers to rebel against my management. Let me be clear, this is not going to end well for you," Miguel said, his voice thick with menace. "I can put an end to that stall of yours and make sure you never sell a single egg in this village again." Clara clenched her fists, her anger rising, but she would not give in to intimidation. Matias and Esteban, they had given him something that Miguel could never take away: courage. She looked directly into Miguel's eyes, without fear. "You can try to take me down, Miguel," she said, her voice firm. "But I'm not alone anymore. And workers are no longer alone. You know time is against you." Miguel stepped back, his smile fading. He realized that threats would no longer work like they used to. Clara was now a key player in something bigger, something he couldn't control so easily. With one last look of disdain, Miguel got into his car and drove away, but Clara knew that wasn't the end. As soon as Miguel's car disappeared over the horizon, Clara felt a wave of relief mixed with apprehension. The battle was just beginning. But this time, she knew she wouldn't face the fight alone. As the sun began to set over San Antonio de los Andes, Clara felt a new determination well up in her chest. She and the other workers were ready to face whatever came next. The icy winds that blew through the mountains of San Antonio de los Andes announced the arrival of winter. However, the growing cold did not extinguish the heat that spread among the workers at the Hacienda Los Pinos. Meetings in the community hall became more frequent, and Clara Domingues, once an invisible woman amid the chaos of exploitation, now found herself on the front lines of a growing resistance. The repairs to her house were almost completed, and with each nail hammered, Clara felt her spirit rise along with the renewed walls. However, the most important thing was not the roof that would protect her from the rain, but rather the strength she had gained by joining the workers. She had become a leader, someone everyone trusted to guide them in the face of the injustices that were still perpetuated under the administration of Miguel Arce. That afternoon, a new meeting had been called. The small community hall was packed with workers and their families, all eager for the next actions. Matias Rivas and Esteban Rivas, they were present, as always, coordinating strategies and keeping the resistance energy high. Clara looked around, marveling at the strength the community was demonstrating. "Today we need to talk about the next measures," said Matias, his voice cutting through the hubbub of conversations. "The audit is still ongoing, and the information we have so far indicates that Miguel Arce has embezzled a significant amount of resources from the farm. Not only that, but there is also evidence that he has been bribing officials to hide his actions." There was a murmur of indignation among those present. Clara felt the heat of anger spread throughout the room, but she knew that this feeling could be the fuel for something bigger. The injustice they had all suffered would not be forgotten so easily. "We need to be ready for confrontation," continued Matias. "Miguel Arce has already tried to intimidate Clara and other workers, but he knows he is cornered. He will fight, and we need to be united." Clara got up. She felt everyone's eyes on her, and for a brief moment, the weight of responsibility seemed overwhelming. However, as she thought about the struggles she had faced alone for so long, a new courage came over her. "I know Miguel is dangerous," Clara began, her voice firm. "He came to me to try to intimidate me, and I have no doubt that he will try something worse in the coming days. But we can no longer remain silent. If we let this go, we will be accepting that our dignity, our work and our lives are worthless. And that, we cannot allow it." Isabel Martinez, sitting next to Clara, nodded vigorously. Other workers followed suit, agreeing in unison. It was clear that everyone was tired of living under Miguel's control, and Clara's leadership had given them the courage they needed to move forward. "If necessary, we are willing to organize a strike," said Esteban, standing up next to Clara. "Your strength lies in your union. If Miguel refuses to change, we will force him to listen to us by not working until he gives in." Esteban's words echoed throughout the room, and the nod of each worker present transformed the atmosphere into something almost palpable. The strike, until then just an idea, began to solidify as a real and imminent possibility. As workers' resistance took shape, Miguel Arce plotted in silence. He already knew that the audit was close to exposing his frauds, but he still believed he could win. Miguel had influence and powerful allies, people who did not want to see the practices of Hacienda Los Pinos be revealed. The night after the workers' meeting, Miguel met with two of his accomplices in his home office. The atmosphere was gloomy, with the strong smell of cigars permeating the air. Miguel was nervous, his face marked with tension. "They're all against me," he said, clenching his fists. "That damn Clara and the Rivas are organizing the workers. If this continues, there will be nothing left for me." "You have options," said one of the men in front of him, with a sly smile. There are always ways to solve problems like this. But it needs to be quick. Miguel knew what they were suggesting, and no matter how much he hesitated, the fear of losing everything spoke louder. He was not willing to see his empire crumble because of a popular uprising. Having decided, he outlined his plan. The next day, he would begin to fight back. The next morning, when Clara set up her egg stand on the side of the road, something seemed wrong. The movement of cars was unusual, and she felt a tension in the air. Around noon, two men got out of a black car and approached the tent. "Are you Clara Domingues?" asked one of them, without any courtesy. Clara nodded, her heart racing, but maintaining her composure. She knew something was about to happen. "We are here to inform you that, on orders from the administration of the Hacienda Los Pinos, your tent will be closed. You are no longer allowed to sell here." Clara's eyes widened in surprise. "But this is absurd!" he exclaimed. "I've been selling here for years. They can't just stop me from working." "Orders are orders," the man said, with a cold smile. "If you don't dismantle the tent by the end of the day, it will be destroyed." Clara felt a deep anger take over her. Miguel was trying to silence her, destroy the only means she had to survive. Without selling eggs, she would not be able to support herself. The weight of injustice fell on her shoulders, but instead of giving in, she raised her head, determined. "I'll inform my friends about this," said Clara, with a firmness that surprised the men. "And you can tell Miguel that he won't take me down that easily." The men backed away, clearly not expecting that reaction. They left quickly, and Clara stood there, alone for a moment, feeling the impact of the words. But she knew she wasn't really alone. Matias, Esteban and the workers were at his side, ready to fight. She took down her tent, but not out of fear. She was preparing for the next move. The strike was about to begin, and now, there was no turning back. The sun had barely risen when Clara Domingues left her home that day, the frigid air of the Argentine winter cutting into her skin, but her determination was unshakable. The village of San Antonio de los Andes, it was silent, but Clara knew that, in a few hours, the streets would be full of voices. The strike that everyone feared, but also looked forward to, was about to begin. In the days leading up, the community had prepared meticulously. Esteban Rivas and Matias Rivas coordinated the workers, ensuring that everyone was united and ready to act. Miguel Arce had made his move, ordering the closure of Clara's stall and trying to intimidate other workers with threats of dismissal and reprisals. However, rather than weakening the movement, this only strengthened the resolve of those who were already fed up with years of exploitation. Clara headed to the meeting point, the large community shed next to the road that led to the Hacienda Los Pinos. As the sun rose above the horizon, men and women began to gather there, carrying makeshift signs and banners. It wasn't a grand scene, but there was power in their union. Matias, standing on a small mound of land, signaled everyone to come closer. "Today is the day we make our voices heard," he began, his voice resonating with a firmness that only someone who has experienced what it is like to be oppressed could have. "Miguel Arce can no longer ignore us. We will not work until he meets our demands: fair wages, decent conditions and respect for our rights." A roar of approval spread through the crowd. Clara felt her heart pounding in her chest. For a long time, she had believed that she did not have the power to change her life, that she was trapped in an inescapable reality. Now, seeing his peers by his side, he felt part of something bigger than his own struggles. Esteban then took the floor, reinforcing his commitment to keeping the strike peaceful but firm. The strategy was clear: block the farm's production until Miguel was forced to negotiate. The production of Hacienda Los Pinos, it was vital to the local economy and Miguel's profits. Any disruption would have an immediate impact. The workers formed an organized march, heading towards the farm gates. When they got there, they saw Miguel's security guards posted, but with no intention of taking action. They knew that if they touched a single worker, the situation could explode uncontrollably. Clara, alongside Isabel Martinez and Joaquin Morales, held a simple but powerful sign: "We don't want handouts, we want dignity." She knew that Miguel was watching from afar, perhaps from the top of his luxurious house, wondering how to contain this revolt. But something had changed. The fear that once ruled the hearts of workers had dissipated. While the workers continued the strike and protests in front of the farm, Miguel Arce watched everything with growing fury. He had underestimated Clara and the Rivas, believing he could crush the movement with a few threats and intimidating gestures. Now his farm was at a standstill, and he knew that if he didn't act quickly, his losses would be catastrophic. However, the audit commissioned by Esteban Rivas was advancing, and the results were not good for Miguel. Evidence of fraud, bribery, and mismanagement was piling up against him, and it was already impossible to keep local authorities from knowing. News began to circulate, and rumors of possible government intervention caused many of Miguel's former allies to begin distancing themselves. Surrounded and without many options, Miguel decided that the time had come for one last desperate attempt to maintain control. He personally went to the place where the workers were gathered, in front of the gates of the Hacienda Los Pinos. When he appeared, Clara was the first to notice. The crowd fell into a tense silence as Miguel's car pulled up. Miguel himself came down, his face marked by exhaustion and suppressed anger. "I'm willing to negotiate," he said, his words cutting through the silence. But the way he spoke showed that despite his words, he had not yet fully accepted defeat. "But this has to end now. You are destroying the farm." Matias he took a step forward, next to Clara and Esteban. "We're not destroying anything, Miguel. You are responsible for this." Matias looked around, finding strength in the eyes of the workers who supported him. "The only thing we want is what is fair. If you cannot guarantee this, we will remain here until you are forced to leave." Miguel hesitated for a moment, his confidence wavering. He knew he had no way out, but he still tried one last trick. "All good. I give you a raise. 10% more pay and some additional benefits. Let's end this once and for all." Miguel's offer, which might have been acceptable months before, now sounded like a weak attempt to maintain control. Clara felt a wave of indignation. They were fighting for more than a small raise. They were fighting for dignity, for true change and for respect. "That's not enough, Miguel," Clara said, her voice calm but firm. "We want a fair deal, and we know you can offer that. No more crumbs." Miguel looked at Clara, and for the first time he realized he had lost. Not just the battle for control of the farm, but also the fear he used to use to keep people under his command. He knew that if he didn't give in, he would lose the farm completely. The investigations were progressing and, with or without the strike, his empire was crumbling. Finally, Miguel hung his head, defeated. "Very good. Let's do this your way." He sighed. "Tomorrow, we will discuss the terms with your representatives." The crowd erupted in shouts of victory. The workers hugged each other, and the sense of triumph was palpable. Clara, however, remained quiet for a moment, looking at Matias and Esteban. She knew that moment meant more than just a victory against Miguel Arce. It was a change for the entire village, for the entire community that now found itself united and stronger than ever. In the days that followed, Miguel was removed from the administration of the Hacienda Los Pinos. Investigations revealed the true extent of his corruption, and he was forced to sell the farm. Esteban and Matias, with the support of the workers, formed a cooperative, ensuring that production was managed by the workers themselves, under fair and dignified conditions. Clara, whose simple act of kindness to Matias years ago had triggered a series of events that no one could have predicted, now felt that her life was complete in a way she had never imagined. Her home was repaired, her community was united, and the dignity she had always sought had finally been achieved. As the sun set over San Antonio de los Andes, Clara looked at the farm's fields with a mix of peace and pride. The future was uncertain, as always, but she knew that with courage and unity, they could face any challenge.